Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Type 35 build. And the Greek tragedy that my Elenice recreation has become through a series of seemingly endless follies that I couldn't have written better if I were William Shakespeare himself. See, it's a little tight in the garage since I can't open the door because the body of the car is currently standing up in its way, like a monument to famous last words. Everything was going along swimmingly. Parts were getting their final finishes, things were being assembled. Those were the days, the things getting assembled days. Then I thought, hey, I should probably try and start this thing. Yep, famous last words. Instead of the engine roaring to life, the starter just sang out an unending whirl, and after an inordinate amount of time trying to stare the problem into fixing itself, it became painfully clear that the body was going to have to come back off. First on the list to diagnose was the fuel system. So, over to the passenger's side, it had all been installed. The intake bolted to the cylinder head and everything sealed up nicely. I even managed to get a secondary return spring tucked in just behind the throttle body so the pedal would have more feel and the throttle blade would actually close on its own. Back to the problem at hand though, the injection system just wouldn't power up. Turns out, while I was positive that I'd ran and connected everything properly, I found, by almost dumb luck, one of the connectors attached to the back of the fuse for the fuel system, that's the second fuse from the left, had become dislodged during reassembly. So out came the ignition coil, I twisted my hand up into the crevice, slid the connector on, and back to life came the fuel injection system. But even with the injection system up and running, the car still wasn't wanting to start. So, back on the other side of the car, I started diagnosing the ignition, checking continuity, polarity. Turns out the crankshaft position sensor, which hadn't seen more than a few minutes worth of life, decided to die. A new sensor, and the engine was ready to test fire. Except, I kid you not, the fuel pressure regulator decided to spring a leak. I'm telling you, I couldn't have written a calamity like this if I tried. Turns out the gauge has a tapered pipe thread, but the housing is tapped for a standard thread. So the only thing sealing the gauge to the housing was the gauge bottoming out on the housing. So a little fuel-resistant tape to create a gasket, thread the gauge back on, and it's holding pressure like a champ. The brakes, not so much. Because when it rains, it pours. And with the body off, I noticed some drips forming on the bottoms of the residual valves. Tighten the brass fittings, and they break. Replace them, and they break again. After half a dozen snapped fittings that just wouldn't seal the brake lines, even after polishing, bedding, and tightening them to an inch beyond their lives, I did some research and found a neat little fix, which was small brake fluid resistant O-rings in the seats. Tighten the fittings down, bleed the brakes, no leaks. Pump the brakes up now and again to build some pressure, dry as a bone. Not everything has been 2 steps forward and 3 steps back though. I got the exhaust system installed, header bolted up, ball and socket joint sealed, tailpipe hung. The drag link and tie rod got stripped, metal finished and clear coated to match the front axle and forelinks. Even took a laser and aligned the front wheels so they're all nice and straight. The radiator's in place, all 4 shocks are on, even put the headlights in too, just temporarily. Make sure they work. Happy to report, they do. Back to the wheels. A lot of cool happening with the wheels and tires. I'd originally wanted to sandblast the wheels for a raw finish, but stripping some of the powder coating revealed the wheels have a really heavy key machined into them for the powder coating to grab onto, which I'm thinking is going to look awful once blasted, so I decided to spray the wheels in a magnesium color. Silver would have made them look too modern, and I'm still aiming for that old, worn-in look. I sprayed them in a bunch of light, dry coats to build up a surface texture like an old raw wheel would have naturally. Didn't come out too bad. I also swapped out the long close-ended lug nuts for shorter open-ended nuts. Subtle change, but I think it looks better. Though it's not near as subtle as the work that's been done to the tires. Oh yeah, I even worked the tires over on this thing. I really like the tread pattern. They look a lot like an old set of bias plies from back in the day, but like every modern tire, they had billboards plastered all across the sidewalls. So, a DA and an unbelievable amount of rubber dust, and I got the sidewalls shaved as smooth as if they were made 100 years ago. I kept all the important info around the bead, tire size, inflation pressure, all that, but just look at how cool that is. Will anyone notice that I shaved the sidewalls on both sides of all the tires if I didn't point it out? Probably not, but that's the whole car. Just loaded with details people had probably never noticed unless I pointed it out. While we're up front, I also swapped out the spring eye bolts. I originally used a 5/8 shoulder bolt, which had a 3/8 threaded shank, and the longer I looked at them, the less confident I was that that small shank would be strong enough, so I drilled and tapped the front cross member, with it still attached to the car, and fit a pair of full 5/8" threaded bolts instead. Much beefier, these new bolts are. The rear shackle hangers still use the 5/8" shoulder bolt, but they're welded to the hanger so the shank isn't supporting any weight. It's just holding the nut on, so I think the 3/8 will be okay there. Then there's the passenger's compartment. This is really cool. I wanted the completed car to have underseat storage, so on top of paneling the under seats off, I added a pair of wicker baskets. One of those ideas I'd had since the very beginning, but it took me a while to find a rectangular basket for the driver's side and a square basket for the passenger side that both look the same, but I finally got some, and oh, they look so good. Driver's side takes up all its space. Passenger side leaves room for the battery. So nice. I needed something to keep them away from the drive shaft though, so I bent up a couple of aluminum stops that, if you look between the basket handles and through the tunnel, you can see they're about 2 inches tall and just as wide. Should keep the baskets from sliding out of place. They'll be good for holding paperwork, rags, odds and ends. They've got little wooden feet glued to their bottoms too, so they clear the tabs that hold the floor to the frame. So neat. What else? Tail lights and license plate bracket got put on. Rear brakes got new calipers and pads to match the new rotors. And I think that about covers it. Car starts and runs, lights work. All I gotta do now is pop the body back on, mount the hood, fill the radiator, plop the seats in, and the car'll be done, he proclaims confidently.